Fresh round skis in there. We're gonna be talking about recoil management with the carbine. Specifically, we're gonna talk about our stance, our grip, developing a good mount or shoulder pocket with your rifle. And we're gonna demonstrate that with a drill that's gonna help you diagnose yourself and learn how to kind of really truly manage that recoil of the gun. First and foremost, we need to talk about really the fundamentals of shooting and how it applies to really both pistol and rifle and a lot of shooting for that matter. So the first things first, we're gonna talk about our stance and our structure. A thing I learned a while back from a mentor of mine, Scott Jadlinski, who runs Modern Samurai Project, a way that he teaches how to develop a good stance for yourself, starting off with what a typical stance you might see, which some people call this the isosceles stance, where you've got your feet generally about shoulder width apart, not staggered at all, not really balanced from my front and back. I'm somewhat stable from my left and right, but not so much from my front and back. Why that's going to be an issue, and this is also depending on your size and strength levels, of course. But if you're like a smaller person, for example, and you're standing just like this, and you're shooting this big gun, and it starts getting you you're starting getting a lot of recoil impulse, it's gonna start pushing you back, and sometimes you're gonna notice you're gonna start coming up on your toes. What that's gonna translate to on target is your rounds are gonna start climbing high, and you're not gonna be able to really shoot fast or accurately, so it's gonna be kind of difficult for you. So a couple things that I like to do, I'm a right-handed shooter, so typically I'll take my left foot and just step it forward slightly, what some people might call a fighting stance or a good balanced stance. So my feet are a little bit, usually kind of directly under my body as far as not being too wide, not beyond shoulder width, because if I'm too wide, then it's going to be really difficult for me to move in and out of positions or have what we like to call exits and entries. Having some agility is a little bit more important from this position. So I have my feet somewhat staggered like this, and I have a little bit slight forward center of gravity. What I remind myself to do is I think about bringing my chest over my knees, or my chin over my knees is another way of thinking it. My feet are staggered, and I'm pushing my hips back slightly, so I have a pretty noticeable forward center of gravity. So I have just a slight lean forward, and that helps me when I'm actually shooting to have a pretty consistent index point and also use my body to manage the recoil. That way it leads my hands to actually really manage the muzzle flip or the muzzle climb rather on my carbine. So that's stance. Make sure we have a nice balanced stance. So I got a slight bend in my knees, slight forward center of gravity. My hips are generally oriented towards the target that I'm shooting at. If I've got multiple targets, we'll just talk later about in transitions, it's gonna change a little bit. But for now, I've got this one target in front of me. I want my hips faced towards the target, and I want my feet slightly staggered, slight bend in my knees, a nice balanced stance. And I'm pretty comfortable right here. Some people like to take their toes and point both their toes towards the target because that'll force their hips to be directly in line with the target. That's something to try out if that works for you. I learned it once and it worked for me for a while, but now I'm a little bit more, I have my toes a little bit more spread out. My hips are still faced towards the target. My knees are bent and I have a nice balanced stance, and I can move out of this position if I have to, and everything's good to go. And I can actually manage the recoil of the gun. The next piece I want to talk about is grip. We've talked about how to grip the pistol, similar concepts in regards to how I'm going to apply pressure to the gun. So first and foremost, my firing hand. What's my firing hand doing? Well, my firing hand is just relatively firmly grabbing a hold of the pistol grip here. I don't really want a whole lot of tension in this hand because I need this finger to be able to move independently and relatively freely. I can still add a little bit of pressure with my pinky and my ring finger to kind of hold on to the gun, but for the most part, I want this hand relaxed. Now this hand is actually going to be doing a little bit more work. In this case, it's going to be like we talked about in the earlier videos where we want to be grabbing mid-length on the rail. So I have my support hand right about here. I don't want it far back here because then I don't really have control over the muzzle. I don't want it too far forward because now that's going to open up my structure and open up my hips, and then I won't be really able to manage recoil. And typically what I'll see with that is I'll see my dot or something like that bounce up and to the right typically. That's what I'll see with that. I just won't be able to consistently manage that dot properly. So mid-length on the rail, and also like we talked about before, I know I'm getting it right when I sort of take the slack out of the gun and I begin to see my bicep begin to tense up ever so slightly. I got my support hand where I want it. Typically for me, I like to have my index finger pointing generally towards where I'm shooting at. So I have my index finger running along the side of the rail here. My thumb is just over top of the rail here, over top of the barrel. So I have a lot more control on this, and I can basically relax my entire right arm and my entire firing hand if I'm doing this correctly and basically taking the slack out of the gun and pulling the gun into my shoulder pocket. I don't need a whole lot of tension in order to do that. A lot of times for newer shooters, I would say that tension is the enemy, because a lot of times for newer shooters, they're gonna really wanna grab down and really hold on to things thinking that that's what they're supposed to do. But in reality, you kinda wanna be balanced in that regard. So you want just enough tension in order to manage the gun properly, but not too much in order to start inducing things that you don't want to do. So there's that. So you've got your stance and you got your grip or support hand and firing hand placement. Now the last part I want to talk about is developing that shoulder pocket. When I first heard about the shoulder pocket, I'm like, okay, I'm just guessing you just put the buttstock somewhere into this little concave spot in my trap and collarbone or something, thinking that's what that was. It's not the case. really for me, the way I learned this is creating that shoulder pocket. So in order for me to create it, I'm thinking about doing a couple things. One, I got to get a good cheek weld to my gun. So with the cheek weld, I'm placing my cheek right along the buttstock of the gun. I'm not pressing my head into it or inducing any real pressure with it. Really, I'm just kind of like putting my cheek on the left side of my gun here. Now with my shoulder or my delt, this portion, I'm sort of lifting it up with my traps. I'm kind of doing a shrug with my one arm in order to bring that in position, and it sort of rolls my shoulder forward. And so what that does is it creates this little channel for or a pocket, if you will, for the buttstock to go into. And I kind of think about, for me, what kind of started to work is if I think about pinching, almost like clamping down on the back side of the buttstock here with my shoulder, and then the other side with my cheek. So I'm kind of like clamping down on the back of it, almost like I'm kind of trying to grab it with my cheek and my shoulder somewhat. By doing that, it creates that little shoulder pocket. And if you notice, the buffer system here, the buffer tube is below my collarbone ever so slightly. Like I'm not trying to shoot like this. I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place to do it, but for the sake of good recoil management, if I'm not wearing like body armor or anything like that, I'm gonna want that nice down and low so I can really use my body to absorb that recoil. This is pretty comfortable where I want to be. So I've got a nice shoulder pocket that I've developed with my cheek, my shoulder. I'm pulling the slack out of the gun ever so slightly with my support hand. And I know I'm doing that because I've got my bicep activated. So now I'm ready to shoot. This is the position I'm gonna be in. Something I always have to remind myself, because I just started doing it wrong, was not pushing my hips slightly back. And so now this is gonna be a nice position where I'm gonna be in when I start doing the drill. So next we're gonna go live, and I'm gonna demonstrate this next drill that I learned that's often referred to called the doubles drill. And so there's a lot of professional shooters out there that use this drill for a lot of things, but one of them is really good for me is because it helps me to do a lot of self-diagnosing. If we were to look at the target, we've got all these little spots that we can aim in at. And so for me, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at that, I'm gonna pick a spot on the target. So in this case, on this target out here, I got this big red heart that I can put my dot overlaid onto. So I'm gonna keep my vision locked in on that spot that I've picked out. And so when I do the drill, I'm gonna take about 8 rounds to do it. And I'm gonna start aimed in, I'm gonna fire 2 rounds, I'm gonna let the gun settle and pause, fire 2 rounds again, pretty fast splits too. I'm not gonna be doing slow and controlled, I'm gonna be going like a bang bang. So I'm looking for more like I would say between like a 0.18 and a 0.2 split between my 2 rounds there. So pretty fast. And that's important to do so because that's gonna show me if I'm doing something right or if I'm doing something wrong. If I'm doing it correctly, I should have a nice fist-sized group. We're here at about 10, we're about 8 to 10 yards, and this is generally where you're gonna wanna be set up at for this drill. And like I said, this is a good one that you can do for both pistol and rifle, but in today's case, we're gonna do it with the rifle. Go ahead and load and make ready here real quick. I'm gonna do this a few times. We'll talk about it and look at the target and kind of see what information we get from this target. I mean, this is also something, as you're doing this, you can kind of self-diagnose yourself as you're doing the drill. So if you start seeing your shot group get kind of chaotic, if you will, that should be your indicator to say, okay, let me fix myself. So this first iteration, I'll show you generally what I'm looking for. Then we'll do another iteration of what happens when I'm not doing something correctly and how to fix it. And then we'll do that, do some diagnostic stuff, and then we'll do it again and hopefully bring it all together and show you, again, a good example of what right ought to look like. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do it. So I'm gonna do we'll see how many rounds. I'll probably do about maybe 6 to 8 rounds and just kind of demo this. So going live. Safety on. So now let's take a look at the target. So right out the gate, the very first round hit to the left. So that was probably just me not getting into that really good position and also probably not being particularly target focused. But I fixed that right up. And so then now my shot group was pretty nice and tight here. Mind you, we're shooting a carbine at 10 yards. So hopefully my shot group is going to be pretty rad. I would hope so. And another thing to take note of is if you notice, I was putting my dot here, but my rounds impacted down there. And that's okay because that's just the height over bore. That's just something to consider when I have a 100-yard zero with this. Then most likely if I want my rounds to impact in the heart, I'm probably gonna have to place my dot a little bit higher. At any rate, I noticed that I had that first round straight to the left, so I immediately took action and corrected that, and then just kind of calmed myself down and got back on that trigger. But if you notice, my splits were pretty consistent. And in fact, on this next iteration, I'll get us on the shot timer so we can get a better idea where my splits are at. So this next iteration, what I want to do, I'm going to do it a couple times to kind of show you some common mistakes. So this next one, what I want to do is I'm going to do what I don't want you to do, but I'm going to demonstrate how that's bad. And I'm going to stare at my dot and just kind of see what the target shows us. I'm going to have my shot timer go beep just for the sake of getting an understanding of what my splits are. So anyways, all right, going live. Okay. Let me just show you real quick since we got the shot timer out. Let me take this off the the clip here. So what I mentioned earlier by splits, that's the time between my pairs, the time between my splits. So I finished the first round, once the beep came, is arbitrary, so 0.71. So the second round after that first was 0.16. Then I let the gun settle, so it was a 0.93. So that's between the two iterations there. So on average, my splits between rounds are like 0.16, 0.17, which is kind of what we want. This is what we're looking for. Now let's look at the target. So this time I stared at my optic. I just was really forcing myself, which is hard for me to do because I've been trying to not to do that, staring at my dot. And so I started to notice my shot group started to kind of come up a little bit. And another thing to note, everybody's guns are going to be a little bit different. In my case, with modern technology and certain things, I've got this muzzle brake on the gun. I've got this fancy little buffer system in here, and the gas is tuned, so the gun's gonna shoot pretty flat as it is. But if you just have like a normal AR just right over the counter, like nothing done to it, the gun's probably gonna move around a little bit more, just based off of the ammo selection that you have, as well as some other factors. But at any rate, I noticed my shot group started kind of coming up and to the right a little bit, and that's because I was staring at my dot, and that's kind of what happened. So it's really important to be target focused to fix an issue like that. So the next thing I'm gonna do is we're gonna go back up to 10 yards. I'm gonna do it one more time of some sort of incorrect way. So I'm gonna do the wrong thing. So I'm gonna stand all awkwardly. I'm just gonna stand straight up like this, and I'm gonna grab the gun by the mag well and do the doubles drill again and see what I get. And I'm also not gonna have a good shoulder pocket. And I'm gonna stand like this. So this is the wrong way to do it. Let's see what happens. Perfect. All right, let's take a look at the target. So, I mean, I'm still pretty rad, but it started to open up a little bit. It's hard for people to see because it's still a pretty tight group. It definitely felt like, for me, what I was seeing was my gun kind of going all over the place, and I was still kind of ripping the trigger. So I had some rounds here, I had a round here, probably a couple down here. So it was just kind of going all over the place. Let's go ahead and just do it right one more time. So I'm gonna go back to 10 yards. I'll probably go back to like a little bit further and just kind of see what my shot group does. So now I'm gonna use a different aiming point. So I'm gonna aim up in the eye box rather, and see what I get. First, let's make sure. Let's go ahead and put some fresh round skis in there. Okay, so I'm gonna get the shot timer, and then I'm gonna aim at the head. I'm gonna fire, do the same drill, so 2, settle 2. Now I'm just gonna keep my vision focused right there in the little triangle on the target, probably in the little, the nose, if you will, and see what I can get. So again, I'm at 10-ish yards, so I'm probably gonna wanna hold my dot just a little bit higher to see if my rounds impact in the spot that I'm looking at. So here we go. Ooh. Okay, let's take a look. So not horrible, but I was a little bit further back, and so it kind of started getting away from me a little bit. But generally, I'm able to self-diagnose and able to see it, and I'm able to correct myself as I'm doing the drill to tighten everything up and fix my stuff. Really, for me, what this drill helped me do a whole lot was truly understand how to be target focused. Like, that was really the big takeaway for me from this drill, and really helped me kind of develop myself as a shooter. And it translates really well to everything else. So the doubles drill is a really good drill for self-diagnosing. You can do this at home, probably at your home range, as it were. But yeah, it's a really great drill to help self-diagnose yourself and make sure that you're doing all the fundamentals correctly. So thanks for watching.